Aoi Todo, a character who was introduced in Season 1 and immediately won the hearts of several fans, which understandable so, because he has an incredible aura and is just one of the greatest characters in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. However, a lot of people wish he was still able to be in the manga despite losing his hand in the most recent battle against Mahito, because people really like Todo's potential, me included. So today I wanted to use this video to explore the story and see what would happen if Aoi Todo never lost his hand. I'm Eternal Flame, and let's get into this Jujutsu Kaisen what if. Now, there are several ways to write in the narrative of ways of how Todo could have ended up surviving. However, the way that I'm going to use in this specific video is basically going to be if he was actually able to activate Simple Domain on time. If his Simple Domain was just a little bit faster in blocking out Mahito's 0.2 second domain expansion. As a result of that, his hands will not be lost, and instead of needing to clap Mahito's hand, thus losing access to his other hand, he'll be able to clap his own hand and allow Yuji to land his own Black Flash after Mahito lands a Black Flash on Todo. Now, the battle between Mahito and Yuji will basically go the exact same way. Mahito will enter his true form, Yuji and Mahito will begin to fight and clash with each other, Yuji will use the Divergent Fist in order to distract him, and Todo will do a final distraction with not clapping with that final movement, allowing Yuji to land a punch on Mahito's open exposed side. Now, the reason that I think Todo would not swap the places is because he could see that if he turned around, Mahito's exposed side will be the one taking damage anyway. So, taking a distraction and pretending that he was going to use his curse technique was the optimal best path for him to take, especially considering Todo's massive amount of IQ. He would definitely be able to see right through, and that this is the best way to do it. However, that is where the timeline remains the same for a little bit. Now let's get into where the timeline actually begins to change. Now, I do think Todo would genuinely not let Mahito run and just immediately clap and teleport him right in front of Yuji again, not letting him crawl away. However, I don't see that making much of a difference because Brain Man is just going to interfere immediately as well, and probably interfere a little bit faster, dealing with both Yuji and Todo before absorbing Mahito. Now, both of them are not going to die, however, they will be dealt with nonetheless. While Todo's existence does help a little bit in the battle against the Brain Man, it doesn't really help all too much because eventually Urame is going to show up and freeze them. However, seeing an interaction between Todo, Choso, and Yuji would be really funny considering both Todo and Choso call Yuji their little brother, so seeing how those two would interact would be interesting, but there wouldn't really be all too much, purely because Urame would end up freezing Todo as well, and Todo really doesn't have a way to actually resist the ice of Frost Calm, especially with how tired he is in this current state, which is going to lead to Brain Man escaping and taking Gojo in the prison realm with him. Now, after this point, I'm going full-on manga spoilers because I've been very careful not to call him anything other than Brain Man, so if you don't care for manga spoilers, you can continue on with the rest of the video. But yeah, let's continue on with the rest of the video about how he completely changes the culling games and depending on where we end up placing him. However, before we can even talk about this, we need to talk about a battle that is going to soon be coming, which is going to be Yuta and Naoya versus Todo, Yuji, and Choso. Now, I do think we're going to have Yuji, Todo, and Choso being able to take out several cursed spirits together, starting to get a little bit stronger, and I just don't see Todo letting Yuji leave alone or even with Choso, especially considering the fact that Todo is still capable of fighting. So I can see Todo most certainly going back with Yuji in the process, even though Todo would be there putting Yuji in a little bit of a better state in his mental state because Todo knows the right words to say to Yuji. I don't think it would help too much considering the level of depression that Yuji is currently going through because of all of the guilt he feels for all the actions caused by Sukuna, and the best thing Todo could really do for him is continuing to stay with him at that current moment. This is when Naoya arrives, landing a punch on Choso, Todo, and Yuji all in a moment before they could even realize what was going on as he lands back onto the roof that he was standing on. And before you guys think Naoya is not that fast, I want y'all to remember this. Naoya basically perception blitzes Yuji and Choso originally, and he was holding back in speed as well because he wasn't taking it all too seriously, so he'd certainly be able to do it to all three of them. However, Todo would be very fast to catch on to the technique that Naoya was using, and recognize it as projection sorcery. However, this is when Yuta Akotsu ends up arriving in order to fight them, and what I see being the most likely to happen is Choso still fighting Naoya the exact same way, but in the other side is going to be Yuji and Todo versus Yuta together, especially with Todo immediately recognizing Yuta and realizing just what type of threat this is, but also him being a little bit excited because he did want to fight Yuta originally in Goodwill. Now, while they do a lot better, purely because of the fact Todo and Yuji basically have this near perfect synchronicity with each other because of how well they are at working with each other, like it's basically instinct for them, they aren't going to win, not by any means. It's just going to result in likely a very similar situation to in the original timeline, where Rika ends up holding Yuji. However, I can see in this timeline, Todo getting a little bit emotional and getting a little bit worried just for a second, which that second Yuta will take advantage of to knock Todo out. It should also be noted, Todo is the weakest person here out of the group. Yuji had already left Todo behind at the end of Shibuya, thanks to getting another Black Flash and getting even more control over his cursed energy, as well as Choso getting even stronger as well, thanks to the Rage Amp he would get from meeting his father, which would give him even more cursed energy than he had access to before. While Todo is still good as a support player, he isn't the strongest one of them there. However, he would end up getting defeated nonetheless, resulting in Yuji also getting defeated and Choso getting defeated too, and forcing Naoya to have to report to the higher-ups that the three of them are dead. They end up meeting up and waking up in the original meeting spot they met at before, getting fully informed of the culling games, what the original plan is, as well as all of the colonies, and what they are going to need to do, and the rules they are going to need to make, while also getting the information that Yuki and Choso will end up staying behind in order to protect Tengen. However, this is where we get to the two potential paths that this story could end up going, which path A is Todo staying behind with Choso and Yuki in order to protect Tengen, mainly because Yuki is Todo's master. However, the second timeline is Todo ends up joining Yuji and Megumi in the Tokyo colonies. However, before we continue with this video, I need to talk about the sponsors to our page, Anime Express. Now, if anyone's been on the channel for a little bit, they will know we are sponsored by Anime Express, which Anime Express is an anime merch store that has a lot, and I mean a lot of cool things. You want a full-length retractable anime sword? They got that. You want a Yuji Itadori hoodie, known as the King's Vessel? They got that. You want a Naruto Uzumaki hoodie? They got that, and they got Pokeballs, they got necklaces, they got so much here. And I got something I'm going to hook y'all up with. If you use code ETERNAL10, you can get 10% off, and you can get so much really cool things. Like, I personally recommend getting the Pokemon Ultra Ball because I plan to get that, as well as the Jujutsu Kaisen Domain Expansion hand sign necklace. They just look super, super cool. They got really, really cool stuff, and I really recommend it. Make sure to check out Anime Express in the description below, and remember code ETERNAL10 for a 10% discount. Now let's go over timeline A first, which is going to be if Todo stays behind with Yuki and Choso in order to fight Kenjaku. And the timeline immediately has a shift right at the beginning, where when Kenjaku arrives, he doesn't just see Choso standing there, but he also sees Todo standing there, the both of them directly waiting for him, as Choso and Todo have a total of one mission, which is to get Kenjaku to use another curse technique other than curse spirit manipulation, in order to give Yuki as much of an advantage as they possibly can, because they know they themselves cannot beat Kenjaku alone. However, Yuki has a much better chance of that because she is a special grade. And this battle immediately goes a lot better than it did in canon for just Choso versus Kenjaku solo. While I can most definitely still see us getting the speech of Kenjaku because Kenjaku is such a yapper, Todo and Choso do really, really well together, purely because their curse techniques really, really heavily complement each other, as I talked about in my What If Choso Helped Yuji Fight Mahito video. Choso gives Todo a lot of things to swap places with, a lot of blood to be around. Stack that with the fact that Kenjaku is going to be summoning up cursed spirits for a little bit as well, which just gives Todo even more things to swap his place with Kenjaku as well as with Choso, and the ability to force Kenjaku to have to take several hits. They are going to definitely be able to get much stronger. I can also see being likely that Choso still gets his free Brothers Amp, but more importantly, Todo ends up landing a Black Flash because he feels like he's being left behind by his brothers once again, similar to what happened in Shibuya, because I could see over the few amount of time that he would start to see Choso as his own brother, purely because of the fact that he's Yuji's brother. Yuki versus Kenjaku ends up going the exact same. Even though I do think Kenjaku would have taken damage thanks to Todo's presence, I don't think it's enough to change the battle between Yuki and Kenjaku, only maybe to force him to activate his domain even earlier than he did originally. However, I actually see one massive change being happening after the domain is done and Yuki battles against Kenjaku in her injured state, which is when Kenjaku does the head spin trick in order to avoid the piercing blood. However, Todo, in his intelligence glory, is going to step behind the piercing blood and clap and swap places again to force Kenjaku to have to take the piercing blood that he tried to work so hard around. Now, with Todo's presence, with Todo both being an extra fighter, as well as the fact that Todo can do swapping around to force Kenjaku to take even more hits in the fight, while I do see Kenjaku taking even more damage, I do eventually just see him using anti-gravity in order to slam Todo, Choso, and Garuda into the ground. And this is where the timeline ends up going the exact same. Yuki in her last moments makes sure that both Choso and Todo end up escaping with the knowledge they have gained. This knowledge would be extremely valuable, and they had to make sure that the two of them lived no matter what. However, in this timeline, Kenjaku is much more exhausted thanks to the disorientation that's caused by Todo's technique, as well as how many more hits they would have been allowed to land in this fight in comparison to before, where they couldn't land anywhere near as many hits. But now with Todo on their side to clap and forced Kenjaku to have to take hits, they were able to damage him quite a bit more, unlike in the original canon. Now, I could see in this timeline Kenjaku actually ending up dying because he's too damaged in order to counter the black hole, thanks to the massive bombardment of hits he's going to end up taking. However, I can also just see it happening where Kenjaku is just even more damaged and even more exhausted because he had to put so much more effort into stopping the black hole because of how exhausted he was from the fight. While they ended up getting much closer to defeating Kenjaku in this timeline right here and there, unfortunately they weren't enough. Todo, Choso, and Yuki were not enough. However, now Todo has landed another Black Flash, as well as Choso has gotten even stronger, and they were still able to give the information to everybody. Unfortunately though, this is where this scenario ends. Not because this is not where the story ends, but more so, I don't know how the story of Jujutsu Kaisen is gonna go after this point, purely because this is the arc we're in the manga. So basically, the only point that I could see potentially changing is every character who arrives to fight Sukuna has slightly stronger reinforcement because they have an extra training partner in Todo, and whatever Todo would end up doing, I'm going to wait until the Sukuna battle is finally done to show that change to the timeline and upload that as a new separate video about how the battle would have gone if Todo never lost his hand. So yeah, to summarize this timeline and topic, Todo ends up landing a Black Flash. The two of them get really close taking out Kenjaku, however they don't actually succeed in it, or it could have ended up being they succeeded in it depending on what you yourself view is much more likely. I just view it as much more likely that Kenjaku ends up surviving, and it's a very similar timeline to what happened originally. However, that's just scenario A, and now we're going to get into scenario B, which scenario B is going to be what if Todo went with Yuji and Megumi in order to go to the other barriers. Now, up first, they do need to get Hikari Kinji. And, well, that arc happens the literal exact same as it does in canon, other than the fact they are able to take out Kirara a little bit faster, because of the fact that Todo is around, and he would definitely be able to figure it out with his massive IQ, so we can just basically skip past that. Now, I'm going to be 100% honest with you guys and be really realistic. Both of the timelines I'm about to talk about are really not likely to happen, purely because of the fact that all players get teleported randomly throughout the barrier, and I don't see it being likely that Todo lands near Yuji or Megumi. However, we want to have fun up in here. We don't care for probability. That's for nerds. So we're actually going to talk about if Todo landed near Yuji or if Todo landed near Megumi, and how that would change the battle that happens there, and they're likely going to result in the same timeline right after that point. Now, the first timeline we're going to talk about is if Todo was there in order to help Yuji fight against Higuruma. And I really do not see this going much different from original canon, if I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. Now, I do think he'd cast his domain in immediate confiscation on both Yuji and Todo, taking away both of their curse techniques, or in Yuji's case, his curse energy. But Todo would be completely fine because Todo basically fights with his curse energy most of the time, so he just wouldn't have access to his curse technique, so it would be fine, and be Todo and Yuji fighting against him together, and then Yuji would try and cast a retrial, and then Yuji would lose access to his technique and get the Executioner's Sword, which would result in Higuruma letting Yuji go after seeing Yuji's character. I do see the talking phase between Higuruma and Yuji going on for a little bit longer, with Todo being present there, and I think Todo would be able to figure out a little bit of Higuruma's domain, but I don't think he'd be able to figure out the full thing because Todo is not a lawyer. While Todo's a combat genius, he is not a law firm type genius, which you would need in order to figure out the domain. But I can see Yuji still being the more likely one to cast a retrial instead of Todo, because I don't think Todo would risk trying to cast a retrial. Though it is pretty interesting to think about whether Higuruma can cast confiscation on two people in his domain and do two lawsuits at the same time with one domain cast, or he needs to do two separate domains. However, this ends up being a very similar result to canon, where they end up going with Angel to Megumi and all of that jazz ends up happening. But I'm going to put a pause on this timeline for now, and we're going to focus a little bit on the Megumi Fushiguro side. Now for Megumi, the point where I can see them arriving is right after Takuba takes away Hazanoki in order to fight him solo, and Todo ends up showing up to help Megumi in a fight, and to help him take out Reggie. I can see it being very likely Todo tries to initiate some type of conversation, which might actually be able to get Reggie on their side too, depending on the words that they say. However, I'm just going to assume he doesn't, but there is the potential because Todo is very charismatic, but at the same time, Todo is kind of insane and nuts. So, yeah. However, the battle ends up going a lot better for Megumi because of an advantage that Todo basically grants him, which is the fact that Todo basically acts as a sure hit, because Todo can constantly swap places with Reggie in order to force him to get hit by Shikigami, in order to force him to get into the shadows just repeatedly, whatever Megumi needs him to do, or even land his own strikes on him, being a much physically superior fighter to Megumi up to this point. It's just overall going to be much better for Megumi to have Todo alongside him, as it is usually for a lot of fighters to have Todo alongside them. Which leads to the two of them eventually meeting the Angel right after, and the Angel explaining to them that they are an ally, and that they recognize Megumi, in specific for Hana Karesu, and them recognizing Angel and them being fully okay with allying with her, because their original goal was to seek her out and become allies with her to begin with. So basically, Todo arriving in the Culling Games ends up in the same scenario. It's just whether you think Megumi should be more tired because Todo doesn't come up to help him, or whether Megumi will be less tired because Todo will end up helping him. Either way, they end up meeting with Angel, or it's just Todo ends up not meeting with either of them and eventually meeting up with one of them again in order to talk with Angel. Now this is where we end up getting another timeline change, which is really dependent on what happens next. On whether A, Todo decides to be on watch while Megumi, Angel, and Yuji end up meeting with Sumiki, or if Todo ends up joining Yuji, Megumi, and the Angel. Which for this timeline we're going to assume it's the first one, because the second one just results in Todo getting knocked out or evading the Nue Lightning Bolt somehow and not really being able to do anything else. Or dying to the Nue Lightning Bolt, but I'm not as sure about that one purely because of the fact we don't actually know how strong the Nue Lightning Bolt is. So yeah, whatever you think is the result of that timeline, that's your result for it, but we're not going to talk about it. We're going to assume Todo stayed with Yuji and Megumi, as I can see that one also being the most likely because of the entire Todo-Yuji bond thing. So there are two ways I can see this going. Either A, Sukuna knocks Todo out first, and then he knocks Angel because he sees Todo as the biggest threat, because Todo can clap and swap places with him, or B, and he knocks out Angel first, which is immediately going to let Todo be aware, be on guard. Sukuna is the one who is active and awake. And right now, Todo is going to have to play the biggest game of keep away in his life. And the thing about Sukuna that is going to really kick him in the butt here is the fact Sukuna is a really big blabbermouth, and that does not work at all for someone like Todo that is directly there. Because he directly says a binding vow to not hurt anyone, but he didn't even include himself. When Sukuna says that, it's basically going to let Todo know, oh, Sukuna can't hurt any of them. Alright, let's play this game of keep away, because he's going to pretty quickly figure out that Megumi is the target himself after Sukuna takes off one of his own fingers, and it's literally just going to be Todo having to repeatedly swap places, playing the biggest game of keep away and tag away from Sukuna in his life, repeatedly clapping, making sure he can't get anywhere near Megumi, doing things like jumping off the building, etc., over the time span of 60 seconds, which is going to result in Sukuna's soul now being in a finger instead, Yuji's soul being back and even stronger now since he's going to no longer have Sukuna within him. He won't get as big of a 214 amp as it got last time, but he'll still get a pretty big amp. Maki will be there to join them, etc., and I can see one of two situations happening, which is either Urame steals the finger, or they all just straight up fight Urame, and that's a entire massive fight. Which I see them winning because Todo's existence grants them so much more versatility and the ability. Like, Todo could straight up just swap places with Urame and force Urame to get hit by Maki's sword. That is how unfair Todo being there actually gives them of an advantage. And that's effectively what would happen if Todo never lost his hand. It would later on result in Gojo getting freed, taking out Kenjaku, and I don't know what would happen after that point with the Culling Games. I don't know how they're going to end it, but that is effectively where we're going to end off this timeline. Todo being the savior, potentially saving all of Jujutsu Kaisen, never letting Megumi get possessed by Sukuna. They're probably going to get Yorozu eventually because now they have Gojo around too, which is going to be a pretty sick battle, but we all agree that Gojo is going to win against Yorozu. So basically, these all lead in one of two paths. Either A, a timeline extremely similar to the original timeline, just Todo is now around to support in the Sukuna battle, Or B, and this is what I see being also a potential chance of happening, Todo straight up saving Jujutsu Kaisen, never letting Megumi get possessed. Just an overall better timeline because this GOAT is around and he prevents so much of it from actually happening that could go bad. However, that's about everything that I can see being very likely to happen if Todo never ends up losing his hand, but that's just my opinion on this. I want to see what you guys think. Do you guys think Todo ends up changing more, that the timeline is completely different? Do you guys agree with me on what happens, or do you think the timeline just goes the exact same and Todo eventually dies because he gets power glyphed? I want to know what you guys' thoughts are in the comment section down below. I'm going to see you all later. Peace out. Have a good day.